2 weeks ago, we published a video expressing the opinion that a game developer should be allowed to make the art the way they want to make, and that a player cannot expect them to change their art to accommodate. In the original context, this related specifically to some calls for Sekiro to add an easy mode to make the game easier to experience and finish. We still stand by that point. Asking a game creator to serve your own fragile ego rather than express themselves in the way they see fit is the height of entitlement. However, at the time, we didn't understand that a so-called easy mode overlaps with a very different and very important issue: accessibility. Talking about this is complicated since there's a fair amount of overlap in that Venn diagram, not to mention tons of charged opinions that are informed by a perceived culture war that is still roiling inside games culture. If you think we fall into the social justice warriors, we'll get to that. But first, we feel it's our responsibility to revisit the accessibility topic and make sure we represent it completely. In an effort to do that, we'll address the major discussion points we've heard on the topic and allow those most affected by the issue to share their insights on the matter. On that note, we've reached out to several accessibility advocates and gamers of all different opinions, and many got back to us, though some didn't because they didn't want to deal with the negativity it would invite. Regardless, you'll hear from a bunch of different people here. Just want to establish that now so it's not weird when I'm reading a bunch of letters. So why not start with the biggest argument of them all? If Sekiro, or any challenging game for that matter, were to include options that change the difficulty, it would alter the experience intended by the game creators. That's true, and it isn't at the same time. We told you this issue was complicated. The sentiment only stands if difficulty is equal to every player, and it's really not. Players with disabilities are often barred from even attempting to play a game at its intended difficulty because it's physically impossible. Difficulty doesn't even factor in because a good faith attempt can't be made. So often those discussions of an easy mode derail because of what we'll call bad faith players. Those who want to circumvent the intended difficulty flow of a game to achieve the same feeling of success without experiencing the intended struggle or learning process to get there. Forget about them for a second. It may be difficult, but just push them out of your mind and instead focus on another group. Those that want to approach the game in good faith and experience it just like you or I do, but fundamentally can't. For them, arguing against accessibility isn't protecting a creator's vision. It's denying them from experiencing that vision in the first place. That's why the phrase easy mode completely misrepresents the issue. This is Steve Spahn. He's the COO of the Able Gamers Foundation, a nonprofit focused on enabling people with disabilities to play games. For over 15 years, Steve and the foundation have been working to raise awareness of people like him, who are passionate about games, but need additional options to be able to play them. Accessibility activists are not now, nor have they ever, asked for an easy mode. Instead, as Steve puts it, they'd like an equal mode. He summed this up neatly with a conversation he had with Markiplier, in which Mark said,
"People are just asking for the right to struggle." And I told him flat out I was going to steal that because it was so good.
And I guess now we have too, because it's a really, really good way of getting to the heart of this issue. Those asking for accessibility options don't want a ski lift to the top of the mountain. They just want the chance to have their asses kicked by Genichiro like the rest of us. Hopefully by now we're straight on the difference between difficulty and accessibility. To reiterate, if you just want the game to be easier so you don't have to try, then get the fuck out of here. But if you want to approach the game in good faith and experience it as intended, everyone's welcome. Some people just need additional tools to overcome hard physical or mental barriers that others don't have. Or do they need those tools? There's a follow-up sentiment to accessibility that contradicts this idea, that not everything is for everyone. And you know what? That's totally true. There are people that don't mind being excluded from playing Sekiro because of the physical rigors of its gameplay. For example, Twitter user Marty Malt expressed as much in the many Twitter threads we read discussing the original video. We asked him for clarification, to which he responded, "I have long ago become accustomed to accepting my limitations. I know that some games just aren't something that I can play. Take Dwarf Fortress, for example. It's just too arcane and obscure for me to get into, but I get a lot of enjoyment reading about the great experiences that others have. It's like that with the Souls-type games as well." Marty stated that he felt gamers with disabilities are within their rights to ask for more accessibility options, but also that game creators should make make what they want without being shamed for it. This sentiment is echoed by accessibility consultant Cherry Thompson, who writes, "I always try to remind players to be respectful when speaking to developers on social media, though we're all human and a lack of accessibility is usually entirely accidental and just due to them not being aware of who they're excluding. Basically, anyone can ask for accessibility, but has to respect the autonomy of the creators to make what they want." Fair enough. But there's an angle here in which we all stand to benefit from more accessibility. In order to frame the issue properly, we need to revisit a point we made in the original video. We celebrated Soulsborne's difficulty as a unifying factor. People collected online to discuss strategies, share experiences, and point out details that others may have missed. Here, the value is clearly additive. The more people that experience the game and contribute to the resulting community, the more vibrant everyone's experience becomes. The contrary is true as well. Imagine playing a Souls game without a walkthrough, wiki, helpful messages, or really any human resource to enhance your experience. Not only would it be a much more solitary experience, but you might not be able to finish it at all. And before you scoff at the insult to your mad gamer skills, please don't even tell me that you knew you needed to get the Covenant of Artorias ring to progress in the New Londo ruins. God, that fucking game. I love it so much. If we consider the inclusion of anyone that wants to share the experience of a game in good faith, then asking for the tools to allow that is kind of a no-brainer. But again, asking, not demanding. But that flows right into the next problem. How much accessibility is enough? How do you make sure everyone can play your game in good faith? And this is when the issue gets fuzzy. It's not about forcing developers to bend to the needs of every player of every type, but instead it's about being able to ask for reasonable accommodations. And the truth is, despite all this back and forth, the industry is getting better. Accessibility is talked about now more than ever, and games developers are increasingly implementing reasonable accommodations. And Sekiro, for all its prohibitive difficulty and debate, does offer more options and improvement than any FromSoft game made yet. In a wonderfully written article for IGN, Cherry Thompson itemizes these advances. Remappable controls, audio sliders, text size, and UI layout have all made strides to further accommodate those with mental and physical disability. Additionally, before Sekiro, no From game has ever offered a sparring partner to figure out how to accomplish these movesets in a low-risk scenario. We've spent a lot of energy arguing about what should be in Sekiro and whether changes should be made in accordance with accessibility needs, but it was made with accessibility in mind, in at least some capacity. As for the extent options are included, there are always going to be situations where the options don't go far enough and everybody hasn't been accounted for.
Even great games like Spider-Man, God of War, amazing accessibility options, but they didn't cover everybody. But they tried.
This is the key point. Players with disabilities have never wanted to force anything on other players or game developers. They just want to be taken into consideration. This is important because basic options or incidental design decisions might prevent someone from playing a game on a fundamental level. Take Sekiro and its aforementioned audio sliders, for example. You or I may use them to adjust volume levels to our individual comfort, but Cherry suffers a condition called sensory processing disorder. For her, an intense audio or visual display can, in her words, overwhelm my brain, which makes it, quote, shut down and stop processing information altogether. By considering those with disabilities, suddenly what may be considered an optional, if we have time kind of feature, can unlock a whole new market of potential players. Which leads us to our next commonly debated point. While in some cases adding options isn't feasible for a certain game, the notion that it would adversely affect a game's development is an incorrect generalization. A common argument against accessibility options is that they are far too much of a burden on developers, that logistically adding in options comes at a huge cost. And while it's possible it may be difficult to implement certain options at certain times, there are ways around that. God of War director Cory Barlog offered some insight into how accessibility options are put into a game behind the scenes. Options like controller remaps can be easier on some engines than others, and a lot of options come down to what is hard-coded into the controls and UI of a game. Depending on the engine being used, the phase of production, and a number of other factors, implementing accessibility options can be more or less of a hassle to include, and sometimes it really is difficult to implement certain things. But as Cory put it, in the end, everything in game development is painful to some degree. As I mentioned, what advocates are hoping for is accessibility in games addressed on an individual level by developers who want to be as inclusive as possible. Like Barlog, who said he really learned a lot from the experience. experience. Though it may make sense that platforms like Sony, Microsoft, and Steam should be handling accessibility in games, as they have the most reach over the whole of the industry, advocates actually feel differently. Disability advocate and writer Daniel Gilbert writes, quote, "The industry should be given the opportunity to make those changes first. If that fails, maybe some basic requirements are needed to get the ball rolling. But there may be a more powerful force at work here aside from regulation or morality. The free market itself."
So I don't know that we want to go the route of relying on Xbox to enforce this. Like, you don't have accessibility, so therefore you can't publish on our platform. I think it's more of a self-regulation thing where we need individual developers to realize that by not including basic accessibility options, you're missing out on a certain portion of the market.
Adding accessibility options can open a game's potential to millions of players with disabilities that otherwise wouldn't play or obviously purchase a game in the first place. In that regard, accessibility options can be viewed similarly to other features that may convince consumers to buy, like split-screen co-op or cross-platform play. The market is not insignificant either. According to Steve and Able Gamers, there are between 27 and 42 million players with disabilities in the world. With that in mind, accessibility specialist Ian Hamilton offers, quote, "decent subtitling, colorblind friendliness, game level remapping, and adequate text size as a good baseline for commonly requested accessibility features," adding that, quote, "there's really no excuse to not consider them." Some games go above and beyond when it comes to accessibility and serve as a good case study in how accessibility only enhances a game's value as a product. Celeste was celebrated for having particularly robust accessibility settings in its assist mode, and they really did let you change just about everything. Stamina, how many air dashes are allowed, etc. And despite that, it maintained its reputation and experience as a profoundly difficult game. As much as this worked for Celeste, every game is unique. Hamilton acknowledges this as well, writing, "Any kind of challenge is going to be an exclusionary barrier for some demographic. And what that challenge, that necessary inaccessibility is, varies from game to game, which of course makes it very hard to say there's a list of things that should apply across all games. No one knows what a certain game needs more than its developer." Self-regulation by studios and creators will result in intuitive options for as many players as possible, rather than just a boilerplate set of guidelines that may not fit being bolted onto a game before it's thrown up onto the PlayStation Store. The goal here is to find the best solution for everyone. By considering accessibility, developers can make a better product that appeals to a wider demographic. And of course, prospective game players that want to enjoy and share in those experiences aren't restricted from doing so just because a developer excluded them through ignorance. To that end, Able Gamers created the website accessible.games to provide developers with all the resources they need to consider what accessibility options make sense for their games. Unfortunately, some folks are so afraid that disability advocates are coming for their games that they turn to anecdotal arguments to say that no, games shouldn't be expected to cater to anyone, disabled or not. Many will point to the fact that there are players with disabilities who have been able to play super difficult games and triumphed despite their disability. If they got good, then why can't everyone? It makes sense at a gut level, right? It even feels empowering. There are gamers with disabilities that found the strength to overcome and succeed at the game regardless. Therefore, everyone should be able to do the same. You might even be tempted to pat yourself on the back for believing the best in players with disabilities, but doing so involves a super unfair generalization. Simply put, not all disabilities are the same. Just because one person was able to overcome their specific disability doesn't mean that someone else with an entirely different disability would be able to do the same if they just tried to get good hard enough. Cherry Thompson writes that, quote, "It would make me really sad to be held up as a totem to hurt other people, because really, at the end of the day, that's what it's doing. Weaponizing one person's achievement to hurt and bully others. I'm not here for that." Ian Hamilton offers a great analogy in dealing with this mindset, saying, quote, "I have a life-dominating chronic condition. It doesn't affect my ability to walk upstairs in any way. Would it be reasonable for me to record myself walking upstairs and post that as proof that elevators and ramps are unnecessary?" Well said, Ian.
I applaud any gamer with disabilities who is able to do the things that I'm fighting for. There are gamers with disabilities who can play Dance Dance Revolution, but it doesn't matter what I do in my personal life. I will always be somebody in a power wheelchair, and I will never be able to tap dance. So there is no reason that we shouldn't have options for those people who can't.
When it comes to options for those people who can't, why not have someone else play for you? Another common discussion point around this topic is that accessibility options are not needed due to the proliferation of Let's Play content on Twitch and YouTube. And frankly, We came very close to saying the same in our original video. However, this doesn't withstand a whole lot of scrutiny for the obvious fact that watching and playing are fundamentally different activities. That's why we're all here, after all. Playing video games is a unique experience. Cherry Thompson has a long history of playing, watching, and streaming herself and summarizes the difference in writing. They're not movies or comics. They're interactive experiences, and without actually taking part in the interaction ourselves, we can only experience a fraction of what the game is actually about. It'd be like saying that you can enjoy your favorite meal just by looking at it on Instagram. At most, these avenues are another tool to help experience and share video games, but suggesting them as a full surrogate doesn't really compare. But you know what does have the momentum to ricochet around the internet? A big old juicy conspiracy theory. The Galaxy Brain members of the internet have also been claiming that asking for accessibility is somehow a smokescreen for cowardly game journalists to hide behind since they're so bad at video games. And even beyond that, this issue is yet another skirmish of the great shadow war between real gamers and the dishonest media that continues to exert Illuminati control over all of video games. Yeah, sure, fine. That Cuphead clip is rough to watch, but...
You might hate journalists, and they might give your favorite game a bad score, but that has nothing to do with my fight.
We're not here to comment on that vision of games media. Odds are, if you believe in a culture war in gaming, nothing we could say here would change your mind anyways. What we'd like to do is plant this tiny idea. Who cares? Let's just for a moment say there is some social justice warrior cabal hiding behind the issue of accessibility because they secretly hate hard games. That doesn't matter, because those actually fighting for accessibility to try to make their agenda as plain as they can, they don't want to ruin, change, or rob any game of its challenge or creative intent. They just want to add features to open that experience to more people that otherwise can't experience it. It's possible that some of those people could end up being crappy fake gamer journalists that spend every day plotting on how to destroy video games, but they don't matter. Who matters are the players with disabilities that want to struggle right alongside you. When FromSoft included features like button remapping, it had no impact on players who chose not to engage with the option. And that's what an option is. It's only applicable to the way you play the game if you choose it to be. Which, again, is what Steve and company have stressed. This movement never was and never will be about taking anything away from the game and the people who play them. Instead, it's about developers wanting to make their games available to as many people as possible. Still, it's understandable why these topics provoke such a passionate response from people. For many, it strikes much deeper than keeping a difficult game difficult. To that point, someone please get Ian Hamilton an award. We asked him to comment on the internet drama aspect of this, and he went in hard. After many extremely patient Twitter conversations and diligent investigation, he reached a number of pretty interesting insights. One person saw the conversation as an extension of a Gamergate conflict that never ended. Just another skirmish in a 5-year internet culture war. Another was disabled themselves and had carried a certain bitterness ever since Leigh Alexander's Gamers Are Over article in 2014. To have media types support accessibility felt like hypocrisy. After all, the media had declared games culture dead, right? Another still had become invested in an us versus them style conflict that, after Hamilton's investigations of its own origins, was based on nothing more than fake news and good old-fashioned hate mongering. Like we said, this guy needs at least one award. We're not listing these to try to make the internet sound like it's full of crazy assholes. Actually, just the opposite. This is an issue that impacts a lot of people and for a lot of complicated reasons. Like we said at the beginning, it's complicated. And it'll continue to be complicated because people are complicated. Keeping that in mind is essential to realizing that this topic can't be waved away or solved by simple talking points. That's the first step to understanding the issue and, most importantly, empathizing with and accepting people that just want to play games with us. We ended our previous video with the line that said, Sekiro with an easy mode isn't Sekiro. But Sekiro has accessibility options already built in and is, of course, still Sekiro. And if more were ever added, it would still be Sekiro. Look, we still don't agree that From Software should be pressured to alter creative output, least of all for games writers that can't be bothered to die a few times to beat a boss. But we do join those in the accessibility conversation that politely request the options and features that allow more people to share in the experiences we love.
You may have heard by now that some are calling for an easy mode in Sekiro Shadows Die Twice. That's a pretty spicy topic, I know, but first let's take a look at this clip from comedian Dara O'Brien.
You cannot be bad at watching a movie. You cannot be bad at listening to an album. But you can be bad at playing a video game, and the video game will punish you and deny you access to the rest of the video game.
On a very surface level, he's right. You can't be bad at a movie or a podcast or an album to the point that it will literally